Hello, I created this video to share my research in the rhetorics of trust and reciprocity in the Texas coal plant opposition movement, which will be published in the forthcoming book, Text and Field, from Penn State University Press. Texas leads the nation in the amount of carbon emissions from stationary fossil fuel combustion sites, which primarily use coal. Although Texas places third nationally in the coal-fired power plant production, many of its numerous old technology plants are larger than other U.S. coal plants. Thus, the state's CO2 emissions outpace states that are home to even dirtier plants. This causes additional strain on water supplies during a prolonged drought. The yearly average water diverted from the Colorado River to the Fayette power plant, for instance, is over 5 billion gallons per year. For these reasons, Texas became the site for a contentious battle within an alliance between state government and its energy industry cronies versus several localized anti-coal grassroots activists beginning in 2004, many of which are situated in disadvantaged communities. Several grassroots coal opposition organizations were established in those areas that are not known as sites for environmental activism, but rather for their conservative, rural, and small-town social and political views, or in urban areas such as East San Antonio, with a focus on civil rights and environmental justice. Within my study are 4 Austin-based environmental nonprofits: Public Citizen Texas, Sierra Club, Sustainable Energy and Economic Development, or SEED, and Greenpeace USA. These organizations lent assistance to anti-coal plant groups in Bay City, Fayette County, Riesel, and San Antonio, among other places, to retire local coal facilities, halt construction of new plants, or assure new plants already under construction are built cleaner. The Riesel oppositional group, Texans Protecting Our Water, Environment, and Resources, or T-Power for short, was at the center of a lawsuit that successfully halted former Texas Governor Rick Perry's fast-tracking efforts in 2007. Many of the grassroots groups born from this time period were joined by vocal coal plant opponents elsewhere across Texas, including the No Coal Coalition in Bay City, the Texas Pecan Growers Alliance, now known as Texans for Responsible Energy and Water in Fayette County, and in addition, existing social justice and civil rights organizations in East San Antonio furthered efforts to retire their local J.T. Dealey power plant starting in the early 2000s. The dark orange dots represent existing coal plants in the state. The red dots are proposed coal plants not covered by my study, and the bright orange dots are the locations of my research. I look at how non-co-located coalitions function successfully and analyze instances of trust and reciprocity in coalition building within the Texas coal opposition movement in 5 areas. First, environmental nonprofits. Second, nonprofits and small-town organizations. Third, organizations from sparsely populated communities with one another. Fourth, organizations from urban communities and coalitions with the nonprofits from Austin. And 5, challenges to successful coalitions. First, I will share some of my findings about trust and reciprocation. Trust is a rhetorical construct that implies a confrontation of uncertainty and risk. It is vital to establish connections with new environmental activists and has inspired mutually beneficial relationships resulting in reciprocation. Flavia, a Sierra Club organizer, stated, quote, "There's definitely that breaking in period for the first couple months. I would say where even before you can actively get involved in a campaign, you want to have people trust you and share some values with them so that they know that you're there for the right reasons. As a career organizer, that's something I definitely try to do whenever I'm going into a new space. Just do a lot of listening, share my motivations, and usually that smooths things over." One of my strongest findings is that the strongest motivator toward activism is a sense of betrayal by authorities and what some people call protectors. Betrayal often leads to a desire for justice and motivates the individual to commit to the cause. According to Enrique, a San Antonio environmental attorney, quote, "The city, the county, the state, the feds, somebody, are protectors, wouldn't let that happen. They find out that no, that's not the case. The fact that whoever they view their protectors as are actually in the business of helping the other guy, not their children or themselves." Collaboration with known environmental organizations created tension and dissonance within the No Coal coalitions of members of Bay City, in which they had to overcome negative connotations of their affiliation with the Sierra Club and its environmental identity. For example, Robert, a volunteer with Bay City's No Coal Coalition, stated, "I'm a little reticent to make a strong association with our organization and Sierra Club." Dissonance necessitates resolution or completion and, according to Karma Chavez, promotes a heightened awareness of and attentiveness to the need for constant work and reflexivity. Dissonance also instigates, agitates, and informs. Dissonance disturbs and creates energy around some issue so that it remains altered in our consciousness. Dissonance produces the necessity for movement, also according to Chavez. As mentioned earlier, I investigated 4 environmental nonprofits that collaborated within 3 different anti-coal campaigns. Power struggles are common among various organizations in the environmental movement, and organizations involved with the anti-coal movement in Texas were quite the exception to this. They worked harmoniously and respectfully with one another, according to an organizer with Greenpeace. Each organization had its own anti-coal campaign, yet they supported each other group's efforts. Sociability then becomes a major factor. Engagement with coalitional efforts thus rhetorically encouraged sociability, which, according to Robert Azen, may be discerned in the collective character of ostensibly individual activities and the perspective taking entailed in critical judgment. So they used a combination of discursive and performative efforts, which led to a significant reduction of existing coal plants and the cancellation of proposed plants. Next, I looked at reciprocity between the nonprofits and the local groups. First and foremost, local groups had to overcome plant proponent accusations that the Austin nonprofits presented undue influence on the small town groups. Yet it was the local groups that reached out to these nonprofits, not the other way around. Reciprocity happened between the 2 types of organizations as the nonprofits supplied literature and materials, while the local grassroots groups put a local face on the movement. Not only did the established environmental organizations collaborate with the grassroots, the rural and small town groups formed reciprocal relationships with one another. I argue that reciprocity in this case is a culturally embedded tradition within sparsely populated and marginalized communities, and that rural citizens are accustomed to traveling long distance to help one another. Reciprocity becomes a rhetorical expression of duty to local and nearby communities, which translated to the coal opposition movement and its broad support. Ways in which reciprocity was demonstrated was through a show of support and solidarity, such as attending and speaking out at each other's hearings, meetings, and functions. As an example, Eva, one of the founder of Bay City's NCC, said, quote, "We had kind of an alliance with the pecan growers of Fayette County. We had them come and talk about what the Fayette power plant had done to their pecan trees. Lots of people that we didn't consider members showed up." The most powerful symbolic legitimizer of the movement became then the farmers and the ranchers. They became the public face of the movement. In earlier activism, rancher Robert Cervenka of Riesel was this face. In the later instances of the coal wars, the politically conservative pecan farmer Harvey Hayek legitimized the resistance movement to the coal plants. Local health professionals also became symbolic legitimizers. They legitimized the anti-coal plant claims within the community, symbolically representing credibility and professional expertise to gain local support. Bay City's NCC asked local physicians to endorse their positions within letters to the editor of local newspapers, which was a very effective rhetorical strategy. Eva said she discussed with a prominent local physician who then became on board with the local anti-coal campaign early on. He organized the physicians. He was a general practitioner, but he was the doctor for many, many, many people. He wrote the letter and took it personally and visited with 38 doctors and got 34 or 35 of them to sign it. Fourth, I looked at urban coalitions, which were comprised of diverse organizations that include environmental and social justice organizations, along with the Austin-based environmental nonprofits. T.C. Calvert, founder of the East San Antonio social justice organization Neighborhoods First Alliance, stated that, quote, "They all had their self-interest, but we all had a common thread. And the common thread that brought us together was that the toxins and the pollution was a threat to all our families and to our community." The quantity and the heterogeneity of people publicly opposing this plant offered a powerful persuasive strategy. It was difficult for local leaders and the media to ignore. Yet the coalition, by and large, successfully satisfied the primary demands of each local group. Finally, when the urban coalitions had great success, the coalition eventually disbanded. Three most likely reasons for the dissolution was first, an incompatible tactical and strategic models of activism that led to this fractured coalition. NFA, for example, implemented an Alinsky-style activism which called for a short-term fight with a negotiated payoff, whereas the environmental nonprofit strategy was geared toward the long fight. Second, there was a certain amount of uncompromising ideology between the activist groups or individual activists. And third, due to the nature of nonprofit organizing, often there was more focus on funding than on shared goals. These incompatibilities led to unresolved dissonance, a lack of perfecting the dissonance through trust building and reciprocal action. For example, the lesser-funded NFA felt exploited by SEED. Chavez's work suggests similar findings, that less funding often means more legwork and heavy lifting. On the other hand, SEED felt that NFA was too dependent on their data and materials. The study of Texas coal opposition movement rhetoric demonstrated how environmental justice activism is an adaptive and changeable process through which public engagement is enacted through coalition building. Successful coalitions were created by building trust and strong reciprocal relationships to resolve previous betrayals by protectors and by using dissonances as impetus for a continued and mindful effort. Individuals and groups within the movement performed activism within established vernacular identities and value systems to normalize their activism within their respective communities. To further this work, I recommend additional studies of non-co-located coalitions and the challenges to and advantages of geographically dispersed efforts. As a final thought, coalitions between mainstream environmental, localized concerned citizens groups, and urban social justice organizations may lead to innovative problem solving when members mindfully strengthen the bonds of trust through reciprocal actions.